sleep is a biological need. So there is very much biology involved in this. And that plays a role. And so usually what it is we don't have the right combination. Sleep's like a puzzle. It's super complex. There's a lot of nuances to getting everything just right, but that's usually where it is.
You're listening to Parenting with Impact, the podcast for parents like you, raising complex kids to become capable, independent adults, even in this complicated world. Each episode brings expert insights and real-life strategies to help you parent with confidence, calm, and clarity. Here are your hosts, Elaine and Diane.
Welcome back, everybody, to another conversation in the Parenting with Impact podcast. My guest today is Hilliary Giglio, and we are going to be talking about sleep. She's with Tranquil Beginnings Sleep. We'll give you all that information in the show notes. But, you've heard me say many times it's hard to get somebody to come talk about sleep in complex kids. So I'm really excited to have this conversation. So, Hilliary, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
It's great to have you here. So how did you get to become an expert? How did you get to be here in this conversation as an expert in children and sleep, which we all need?
Yes. Well, my journey to becoming a sleep specialist started with the birth of my first child. And he went from being a bad sleeper to a worse sleeper. And I was convinced that he didn't like his bed, like literally thought he didn't like his bed. And I spent hundreds of dollars buying anything in Babies R Us, still existed then, that was marketed to sleep, right? All over my house, gadgets, places to put him, whatever. Didn't help. My mom actually told me that, hey, there are people who can help you with this. There's sleep consultants. And I had this really big, first time mom ego about it.
Right.
Moms have been getting their babies to sleep for thousands of years. I'm no different. Whatever. Thanks, mom. And a little bit later, I took my son to a mama baby yoga class, and the teacher happened to also be a sleep consultant. So we got chatting. Long story short, she ended up giving me her card, stuck it in my purse, pretended to forget about it. He was about 7 months old when I pulled that card out and was like, okay, I'm just going to call her and have a conversation. I ended up hiring her, and she changed my entire life, literally in 3 days. And my child went from waking up every 45 minutes to nurse back to sleep. It's essentially attached to me, to sleeping 11 hours straight in his own bed. And he is 7.5 years old now. And my background prior to that, I have a bachelor's in psychology and a master's in social work. So I had worked with children and families in various different capacities before then. But I had hated returning to out of the house, working all the time, really long hours after becoming a mom. And I had this experience and the stars just kind of aligned. And I was like, this is it. This is my form of social work, because the ripple effects of a child not sleeping, just one tiny human, on an entire family and beyond, right? Our relationships, our careers, our parenting, our own mental and physical health. And I shortly thereafter got certified and opened my business, which will be 7 in July. I had to think about that for a minute. So I've been doing this for almost 7 years. And it's been really fun over the years to kind of combine my true traditional kind of social work psychology background with my sleep work for all families. It really informs how I work with any family in a very individualized way, but also has allowed me to work with kiddos where parents thought there maybe wasn't someone that could really help them with their child and sleep.
Yeah. It's such in our community, we talk about parenting. We support parents of complex kids and the professionals who support them. Mm-hmm. And sleep is a huge issue in the realm of neurodiversity. And it's so interesting because all the experts in the world will tell you that it's a problem, but very few are actually willing to talk about how do you address it? What can you do about it? Other than, your classic, sleep diet, sleep hygiene, you get the same traditional stuff. But when it comes to parenting complex kids, it's actually a little different. So tell us a little bit about the work that you do with families of complex kids in particular.
Right. So everything that I do with families is fully and completely customized, no matter the child's kind of background and what they're bringing to the table. However, when we are talking about a complex kiddo, we really dig in to what kind of things do they appear to thrive in during the day? What sort of routine, structure, activities? Because I want to know what's going on in the day too. Like we can't only look at sleep. I need to know how does your child operate? How do they, you know, exist in the day and how is their um, also, because so many of these kiddos have a variety of sensory preferences,
Mhm.
they like to dig into kind of sensory profiles. And yes, are they sensory seeking or sensory avoiding, but kind of drilling down into that. Because everybody tells you, no matter your type of child, bedtime routine, bedtime routine, bedtime routine. I agree. However, a bedtime routine for one child versus another is going to look very different in order to actually serve the purpose. Like it's not just a fluff word, cueing system to the body and brain that sleep is coming. And depending on how your brain processes sensory information, is going to make that routine look very, very different. And so it all starts with a really, really big assessment, comprehensive look at what's going on for the child and for the family before I then write a fully customized plan of action.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sitting here, I'm listening to you. My kids are now adults, and I'm remembering how different each of them was as a sleeper, as just as an infant and a baby. Right. Like there was the one who put herself to sleep every night at 7:30. There's another one who was staying awake. And when I think about it now as adults, they're still on their rhythm. Each of them has a very different rhythm.
For sure, for sure. And we all do, and there are some kind of general aspects in terms of like how much sleep does a human of a certain age typically need. But how that gets accomplished and how easy or hard it is and where in the day that sleep's happening, like all of that is very individualized for all humans. So
So are we talking about just little kids or are we talking about all ages?
So in my practice, I work with parents from birth to about 10 years old.
Okay,
I do have some colleagues who are certified in adults and they kind of bridge the gap in that tween and teen age.
great.
I have worked with a couple of kids outside of there that we've decided this program was still a good fit, but that's kind of my area of focus.
Okay. So, what do you think is important for parents to understand? Parents tuning into this are like, sleep, help, help,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm. Right.
So, what do you think it's important for parents to understand better about this context? What are they missing?
Well, first thing, before we get into kind of details of what we should be looking for, is I find parents, and myself included, I didn't share this in my story, but I've got two complex kids of my own. So
Yep.
I've learned along the way with them. Um, I find that we often maybe blame ourselves, like nothing's going to work. We've tried everything under the sun and nothing's working. And I just want to reassure parents that yes, part of sleep and what we're doing to prepare them for sleep, kind of in that behavioral side of things, that's right. But sleep is a biological need. So there is very much biology involved in this. And that plays a role. And so usually what it is we don't have the right combination. Sleep's like a puzzle. It's super complex. There's a lot of nuances to getting everything just right. But that's usually where it is. And so maybe they've tried the right approach in their bedtime routine, but they're missing some aspects with what's happening in the day, with nutrition, with what time their kid's going to sleep, with the physical sleep environment. Because it's not just sleep hygiene. Like you said, it's not cookie cutter, yet sleep hygiene aspects are still important. And so usually it's just that we haven't found the right combo. It doesn't mean everything they're doing is wrong. Typically, when I work with families, we'll keep some pieces of things they're doing, but then we'll add in or change a lot of things as well. Um, Everything starts at bedtime, though, after that. And
Mhm.
we always want to look at that transition to bedtime. And that's going to look different. Children who are experiencing ADHD, they might need to get out a little bit more of their energy. They often like to have a greater sense of control or autonomy. And so we're going to talk about how to build in choices within limits in terms of preparing for bed. Whereas kids who are struggling with anxiety, they really need to feel safe and capable at bedtime. And so how we might set up a routine and preparation for them is going to look very different. It's going to be much more calming. We're going to be doing either visualizations or maybe some body work, and parents learning how to guide their children, and depending on the age of their child, teaching their child how to self-implement some of these things. So we really got to start there before we can expect an A plus on the rest of the night.
Right.
When we nail that bedtime routine, we're consistent, then we can start talking about what's the best approach to help foster more confidence and more independence. Because a lot of times, what comes next is to get my child to sleep. The parent has to be very heavily involved for a very long period of time to get them to sleep. Not always, but often. So then a 30-minute bedtime routine is followed by 90 minutes of, taking their kid back to bed or having to lay with them or sleep with them. And parenting is exhausting no matter what. And so when your
Actually, that.
child
I
can get the sleep they need and the parents, everybody's going to function better.
Well, and we parents, you need a break. Like my memory as you're saying that was my husband's famous line, which was, we would go to sleep, we get the kids down for sleep at night, we go downstairs, and then inevitably we'd hear somebody walking around, or I can't sleep, or I need some water, or whatever. And my husband was always saying, it's really hard to sleep when you're walking around.
Yeah. Right. Right.
That simple,
Uh-huh.
right? So there's something you're saying about really targeting the individual child. How does that work when a family's got multiple kids with different needs?
Good question. So it depends on the age gaps of children. So I work with a lot of families that have multiple kids. And, the hardest scenario is one parent works evenings. We got a parent home by themselves. This is my life. And the ages of your children mean their bedtimes are lining up at exactly the same time, right? In that hardest case situation, when I work with families, I talk about, well, how, is there ways to shift one schedule of the other just slightly? Because sometimes the complex kiddo may need more of your attention, where we might not be able to do just one bedtime routine, throw them all in the bath, read them all a book, right? And so we don't want you doing this all night long, but if we can slightly stagger, we can talk about how to shift just slightly, and it works really great. I also personally used to give my oldest child a basket of toys. It could be not toys for an older child, but something that they could do independently, that they would enjoy doing. And it only came out when I was getting baby brother ready for bed. And he would sit outside the bedroom, but like earshot, eye shot safe. And the goal was, can I get 20 minutes with this child while keeping you entertained? Um, Sometimes it does work out though, where we mostly can do a routine together, get ready for bed together, but then the last 10 minutes, maybe we split off. That works easiest in a two-parent household where everybody's home at bedtime. But those are the kinds of
Not
things
everybody's
where,
reality,
right,
right?
it's not everybody's reality. And I have done it all in terms of one parent, two parents, live-in grandparents, all the different situations, multiple homes. And so it really comes down to looking very specifically. Like you said, it's not just individual about that child, but it's what else is going on with the family. Because you can go buy a book on pediatric sleep, but sometimes that's not your life. And you're like, well, okay, that's not going to work. Or if your child doesn't respond like the book says they should, then you're like, okay, what now? Right? So customizing this, but then also having someone support you as you're implementing, right? So it's not just about the information. When I work with people privately, they've got me for at least 3 weeks, checking in, very close communication on a daily basis those first 3 weeks. Sometimes with complex kiddos, it takes longer, and that's okay, you know?
Yeah. So I have a few questions, and I want to ask one, and then we'll take a break, and then I've got a kind of scenario I want to give you. But the first question I want to ask is, what's your thought about kind of older siblings reading and being part of bedtime for younger siblings?
I I like that. I think no matter who's doing bedtime, nanny, grandma's in town, a sibling, I think the most important things, like I love that if the child can tolerate that changing. If it's always Big Brother, then that's not changing. But some of these kiddos aren't going to tolerate change very easily. So if the child's responding well to that, I love that connection and that interaction. What I think is important is when you know, predictability in routines is really important for all of us. We want to be able to predict what comes next. So we know that at the end of this routine, that's when I'm supposed to get in bed and go to sleep. And so if different people at various times are coming in to that routine, we just want to make sure that kind of the boundaries or the expectations around what this is going to look like stay the same so that rules aren't one thing for one person and one thing for another, because that can start to create a whole snowball effect of the routine no longer being effective.
In our work at Impact Parents, we talk about flexible structure. And what I hear you describing is that you want to have a very clear boundaried structure and then some ability to be flexible within it
Right.
so that if it's this person or that person, that's okay. But that
Right.
the routine is still the routine.
Right. I mean, for example, sometimes my son will want me to read a book to him. Sometimes he'll practice reading, and sometimes we'll listen to an audiobook.
Right.
Sometimes we lay in his bed. I get up at the end, but sometimes we lay in his bed while we're listening. Sometimes he's in a sensory swing because he needs to do a little swinging before he lays down for the night.
Yeah.
So if your child responds well to having that sort of flexibility, then yes, building that in. But the things that we do are kind of in the same order still. And it's yes, flexibility and choices within limits.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. We're going to take a quick break and then we'll be right back because I have a scenario I want to give you. Okay.
All right.
Do you recognize current ADHD interventions fall short? At Dig Coaching, we have developed a new field of engineering and a new ADHD intervention called Cognitive Ergonomics from the Inside Out. To learn more, visit cognitive-ergonomics.com.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm in a conversation with Hilliary about sleep, and particularly sleep with complex kids. And she's done a beautiful job describing sort of the importance of structure, but the ability for flexibility within it, and how individualized it is. And I was very curious about you were talking about how you might do one thing for kids with ADHD, another for kids with anxiety, I'm sure another for kids on the spectrum, and another for kids with all of the above. The scenario I want to give you is an 8-year-old girl who has an older sibling and who's on the spectrum, and she's got some anxiety, and she's really struggling with sleep. And to your point, parents have tried everything. Parents have talked to experts. Parents have, done absolutely everything they could think of to do. And the child is just afraid to be alone.
Mm-hmm.
Really afraid to be alone in the room. And so, we did the work of helping build the tolerance for being alone during the day. And I hear this a lot with complex families is the kid will wake up in the middle of the night, go to the parents' room, go back to sleep. The kid gets the sleep, but now the parents aren't getting any sleep. So what questions might you ask in that scenario, or what advice might you offer?
Yes. I mean, questions I would want to know when this kind of response to being alone started, if it's always been that way, or if it came at a certain age, if there was any life circumstances that may have been involved. I would also want to know more just about their sleep habits and sleep patterns, because we're going to pull that in as well. I'd want to know what it is that they have tried and for how long, because trying something for 1 or 2 nights doesn't always mean it's not going to work, right? And then I would want to look at the child's what makes them feel safe, just in a general sense. And so, what makes them feel safe, aside more detailed than just having somebody there, right? And so then we can start to say, okay, well, if we're going to create this like safe sleep sanctuary, that might include the physical sleep environment. And so, what can we do there? It might be what kind of sound or noise, if this person likes to have either white noise or a soft music in the background. It might be, does aromatherapy in the room, a diffuser help, hour before bedtime, turn that sucker on. And then looking at things based on the answers with really anxious kiddos, I really like to bring in affirmations, and I use what I call sleep cards and affirmations in my clients' bedtime routine, where based on the child and even based on the day, they might pull one of these cards. And it's an opportunity for a parent and a child to talk about, what does this mean? If it's a sleep card, it might give them a tip that they can try if they wake up in the night. We're not ignoring it, but we don't want to focus on all the things they might be afraid of or anxious about. We want to focus on the things that help them to calm and to
Feel
self.
calm. So we do a lot of work around ownership. Whose agenda is it? And so can you speak a little bit to what happens in this scenario or any other when the parents become so tightly needing the kid to go to sleep, but the kid may not be bought in? Can you, I imagine you might experience that a few times.
Yes. Um, so I, you've got to get, when we've got kids that are walking, talking age and above, it is super, super important to bring them into the process. And so we're not just telling them, you need to do this, but it's why is it important in terms that they're going to care about, right? So, some of the things that are really important that we know are good benefits, they may not care at all about. But what activities do they like to do? Like, they may not care if it helps them focus better at school if they're not people who love school, right? Big deal. But what other activities, friendships, what things do they really care about that we can build that connection back to sleep? I also love to find a non-parent adult who is a good sleeper to kind of be a buddy with that person, because sometimes somebody that's not the parent talking to you about it can have a different conversation, right? And so it can be a family member, a parent, parent of a friend, somebody they know already and trust, but that they can kind of look up to and have some of those conversations with outside of parents, eyes and ears. Um, and then starting some lead in. So even at 8, I would use some interactive tools. And so it might be some sort of routine that they can follow and they can kind of lead the process. I use this a lot with kiddos on the spectrum, pictures, even kids with ADHD, but any child. And then it might be looking at kind of what are our expectations? And it, usually is as simple as when it's bedtime, we're supposed to lay in bed and be quiet. And we can't force anyone to sleep, right? But if we can lay in bed and be quiet, like it's not any noise, but we're not screaming down the house. And every family is different. Some families want to and believe their children respond well to building in some sort of incentive process into this temporarily. I don't expect parents to reward their child for sleeping for the next 20 years. And some kids don't need that. It's not like our go-to, but for sometimes we kind of build that up and we can do it gradually. So if we're using some sort of interactive tools or we're making some changes to some things in the sleep routine, which at 8, I would include her in the process of what kind of things might be options. And you can practice that new bedtime routine and familiarize her with some of those interactive tools before you change what happens when lights go out. I find that the older the kid gets, starting at about 3, they tend to need a little more prep time with like an infant, for lack of a better word, kind of pull off the Band-Aid, right? And so giving them that lead in to kind of familiarize themselves, know what's coming before anything changes. And then once things do change, the parents need to have a consistent set of strategies for how are we going to respond. But also it can be gradual. It can be gentle. You don't have to tuck them in and leave the room on night 1 completely. So how do we start? Where maybe you are more involved, but your kiddo's staying in their bed, putting themselves to sleep. And that can be a very gradual process.
Beautiful. So I would love to continue the conversation, but we really actually have to wrap. We're time. So I know that you had said people can find out more about you on your website, on Facebook and Instagram. Everybody, it's at tranquil.beginnings.sleep. And all of that will be in the show notes.
Yes.
So So if you are interested in more support or maybe want referrals for older kids, you can reach out to Hilliary directly there. Yes?
Absolutely.
Beautiful. Okay, so before we wrap, two questions for you. The first is there anything we haven't talked about that you think you want to make sure we say or you include here for parents, or is there something we have talked about that you want to highlight? How do you want to kind of wrap your conversation?
I think I think we hit a lot of the big things of really drilling in. I think we talked about it a little bit with your scenario, but when children get to an age and if they have the communication skills to do this with you, having a collaborative process in the beginning can be really, really helpful. Um, you know, it is consistency is going to be important, but if you kind of have those conversations up front so that you're developing something that your kid and it's another way to kinda get their buy-in. We're not 100% deciding this. Now we might be putting some structure around, yeah, we're not gonna go watch TV during your bedtime, but getting them at the table, right? In a very just no pressure kind of way. And then once you kind of agree on a plan, then you gotta start to be consistent, and it's not to be that you can't ever make changes. Um, and then also just not being afraid to reach out for help. There's stuff with timing, like, I've seen kiddos that need a much later or earlier bedtime, and sometimes we don't find that out. I mean, I've seen some trends with kiddos with various different things going on, but sometimes it takes it's 10 days in before we figure out exactly what we need to tweak, right? And so that's where having someone, myself or otherwise, kind of help that can kind of combine both those things, see what's happening, watch what happens as your child responds to the plan, and help you make those changes. So ask
Yeah.
for help.
Yeah, totally. I can totally support that. And I have this memory of tweaking things as my kids were getting older and working with them in the process. And the coach approach is all about being in a collaborative process of problem solving. And then there were those times where, it was a late night this or a late night that. And as an adult with ADD, consistency is kind of a scary word for me because I'm not always good at it.
Right.
But but that's why that notion of like we know what the plan is, and then we know how and when and what the expectations around it are when we need to deviate from it. Because you can break the rules if you know what the rules are, but if you don't have clear rules first, then you're kind of all over the place. And that's really what I hear you saying.
And parents know their child best. And we have days in my house where it is a very, very off day and I know it and things look very different. And so I always just want parents to know that it is their input and their knowledge of their child is going to be crucial. And
Beautiful. Hillary, thank you. I wish we had gotten to talk about mornings, so maybe we'll have to have another conversation. It's hard to plan evenings without looking at mornings, but for the moment, before we wrap, do you have a favorite quote or motto that you want to share with our community?
yes, I'll make them quick because I kind of have two that relate to two areas of my life. And one is that I love the quote, your child is not giving you a hard time, they are having a hard time. Um,
Great.
Literally was the backdrop on my cell phone for years. And then kind of just more as an adult, but it definitely impacts parenting as well. For me, in the last year or so, it's been your thoughts become your reality. So I've really been focused on my own mindset and ways that I was even unknowingly maybe sabotaging some things in my life with
Yeah,
my own thoughts. So
beautiful. Your thoughts become your reality. A very coach approach, I would say, to life. Thank you. So, everybody, my guest has been Hilliary Giglio. Thank you so much for being here. All of the information is in the show notes about where she can provide support at Tranquil Beginnings Sleep, and that's at tranquil.beginnings.sleep. So, Hilliary, thank you. First of all,
thank you
let me
for
stop
having
and
me.
say thank you. To those of you listening, take a minute and ask yourself, what do you what are your insights from this conversation? What are you taking away from this conversation that you've heard us have for the last 20, 30 minutes? What are you aware of now that you might not have been aware of 25 minutes ago? And perhaps, is there one action you might want to take based on that insight that you want to bring forward and try in your week, in the coming week? And as always, folks, thanks for what you're doing for yourself and for your kids. At the end of the day, it makes a huge difference. Stay tuned. Keep listening to more podcast episodes. Not exactly sure what the next conversation will bring, but I know what the past ones have been. And there are hundreds of beautiful conversations. So we encourage you to tune into the library, find out what you're looking for, and continue being in conversation about collaborative parenting for complex kids. And again, thanks for being here, everybody. And we will see you on the next one. Take care.
You've been listening to the Parenting with Impact podcast with Elaine and Diane. For more information on the Impact Parents community or to join Sanity School for Parents, please visit impactparents.com. If you like what you've heard, please share this podcast with friends who need similar guidance and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.